Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. My guest today is award-winning documentary film producer and director, Yo-natan Nir. I hope I got that right, Yo-natan. Close enough?
Perfectly right.
Thank you. And he is the director behind The Essential Link, the story of Wilfrid Israel. It's the amazing story of a wealthy Jewish businessman and owner of Berlin's largest department store in the 1930s, who was involved in the saving of tens of thousands of Jews. For more information about this documentary and everything about Yo-natan, go to YonatanNir.com, that's N-I-R, and follow him on Vimeo, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Yo-natan, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you, Ira?
Good, very well, thank you. I'm glad you came on because I wanted to talk to you not only about your documentary, but also about your career and why you decided you wanted to become a filmmaker, as well as other things which you can talk about during our conversation. Why did you decide to become a filmmaker?
You know what? I never thought about becoming a filmmaker when I was younger. When I was a teenager, I grew up in a kibbutz. We didn't have cinema. I had nowhere to see films except of my old TV in my parents' house. But after the military service, I went traveling. And when I was traveling, I became a photojournalist because I realized that when I photograph, I just get connected to people through the photographs. I can either connect to the people that I photograph, or I can write about it and show my photos when I go back home and make some contact with other people and tell stories and tell inspiring and interesting stories that connect between people. And it was really, really interesting for me. And then because of some things that happened in my personal life, I changed from photojournalism to filmmaking after the 2006 Lebanon war, where I was injured. And through my injury, or after my injury, I was working in a place called the Dolphin Reef in Eilat, making pictures and videos of dolphins. And my injury made me, or after my injury, I got connected very, very strongly with the dolphins. And that was the beginning of my first documentary, Dolphin Boy. And so I became a filmmaker. I didn't plan to be, it just happened to me. And I had no passion when I was younger for that, but just it happened to me throughout my life.
You're very fortunate because a lot of people who will go through, especially in combat, traumatic experiences don't are not able to pick up the pieces and develop a talent, develop a viewpoint, and be able to put those together to cope.
Yeah, I mean, psychologists called it post-traumatic growth, PTG, which is a very, thing that many people speak about today. I believe that from pain and from adversities and other difficult things that happen to our life, we grow. This is the place where we can actually grow. When I talk to students or to school children, I say, when I make a documentary, I don't look for the stories about people that everything went perfectly fine for them in their life, because this is really, really boring. And it's also not true. I mean, because pain is part of life. There is nothing that we can do about that. And then the question is, will pain make us disconnect from each other, or can we use pain to actually join forces as human beings and try to do good to each other, to help each other, and to make this world a better place?
Do you also think that film is a universal communications medium in the sense that the documentaries you make, the films you make, connect with a wider audience than just, for example, in Israel or just in one country or two countries, but can communicate amazing stuff to a wide variety of people? Even if the language has to be translated on the film or the video, it's still communicating the message.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for universal stories, sometimes small stories that will tell a universal story. It doesn't have to be a huge story like the story of Wilfrid Israel, which really saved almost 20,000 people, according to historians, and that's a huge story. But even if you take a smaller story like my film, My Hero Brother, or Cutting the Pain, or Dolphin Boy. It's not an epic story, it's not a huge story, but it's always touches universal aspects of humanity, relationship between father and son, um, how you deal with trauma, with pain, with death. um, Stories that everybody, doesn't matter what country he comes from, what language he speaks, or what religion he believes in or not, can identify with, because our journeys as human beings are pretty similar in this 70, 80, 90 years, 100 years in the best case scenario, maybe a little more. That's a very short time, very similar. We're going through a very similar path, and we should remember it.
It sounds to me as if you would consider yourself a humanistic filmmaker.
I don't know. I'm just a human being. I think that filmmaking for me is just a tool for communication. And it's a tool to try to communicate values and ideas that I think are important.
But
And
isn't it also, I would think for you, also a form of therapy?
yeah, definitely,
Right.
definitely. Actually, I was one of the people that wrote a protocol that is called DocuTherapy, about the how to make documentary films as part of the therapeutic process, which is something that we worked with in Israel, not only in my commercial films, but also in therapeutic films that we do occasionally. And actually, docutherapy, there is a new PhD that is being written about docutherapy right now at the University of Edinburgh. In my view, documentary filmmaking is not documenting reality. It's creating reality, because you choose what to film, you choose how to edit, you choose what questions to ask. So you directing the thoughts of the audience, in a way. So you are creating reality. You're not documenting reality, and I think it's a big responsibility as well. I mean, what stories are we choosing to tell? Because the stories that we tell becomes our memory in the end. It's Gabriel Garcia Marquez said once, life is not what one lived, but what one remembers, and how one remembers it in order to recount it.
Right.
And
Exactly.
it's true, and we are the storytellers of our lives. So
And
it's
also
really,
for more information, you can go to Jonathan's website, find out more about docutherapy. I thought that was a fascinating part of your career, where you're not limiting it to just documentary films, but a specific approach.
yeah. And you can also see my little TED talk that I was making about
Right.
docutherapy, healing trauma through documentary filmmaking. The idea in docutherapy is not only that you're making a film about someone else, but that you, as someone who experienced pain or trauma, can make your own film. And in the end of this TEDx talk, I said that you don't even need a camera for that,
Right.
because we have great cameras right here. We call
Right.
them eyes. We have great microphones. We call them ears, and we have the best editing room in the world, which we call the brains, and we are telling our stories. And I'm not talking about, taking a great shot of yourself in Instagram and say, oh, my life is beautiful. No, I'm talking about, I'm not talking about running away from pain and painting life in colors of pink. No, but I'm saying that when you experience pain throughout your life, and all of us does, then the question is how we take this pain and we grow from it, and how do we tell a story about ourselves growing from it and inspire other people.
You mentioned the brain as a wonderful editing tool. It's also a wonderful hard drive, so you can store all those memories.
It's true, but memories, and that's something I learned from a really wise man, I forgot his name, are not stable. They're growing and developing all the time. There is no such thing, memory, that is not changing. Everything is changing, you know, we know that everything is changing all the time, and our memories too. So at any given point, you can take the bad memory and try to find a way to get out of it into because we cannot change the past. That we have nothing to do about the past. But from this moment onwards, we can make a choice how to think, how to talk, and how to act.
One other question could be, I do want to talk about Wilfrid Israel in that documentary, but what you're talking about is very important. You mentioned earlier that pain is part of life. So by editing your quote unquote memories or your approach, so the past is the past, it sounds like you're now saying the opposite, which is that you're going to think the way you think, regardless of what the reality was. So isn't that in a way not avoiding reality, but avoiding pain? So you're using your mind to avoid pain. Is that a good way to go?
I don't think there is no way to avoid pain. I think that the fact that pain is something that is not only mine, but is, you know, you have pain. I don't know you. I met you 10 minutes ago, but I'm sure that you experienced pain in your life, and terrible times and sad times. And sometimes we are so ashamed to be vulnerable and to share our pain with others, and then we're losing something, you know, we're losing the ability to connect to other people's, and by connecting to them, being inspired by them, inspiring them, and create some kind of positive change. So this is one thing. And the other thing is, when you tell a story, it's a question, am I going to tell the story of my trauma, or am I going to tell the story of my rehabilitation from the trauma? That doesn't mean that I didn't have the trauma. I had the
I
trauma,
see. Yes,
but
I get your point. Right.
I focus on what I can do about that. You know, there is nothing that I can do about what is what happened to me or what is happening to me right now. The only thing that I can control is how I react to that. And if I try to react in a positive way, if I try to learn from my mistakes, and if I try to be a better person, first of all to other people, but of course also to myself, if I am able to forgive myself for my mistakes and forgive others, if I'm just, you know, trying to charge myself with positive energy, with compassion, lots of compassion. Compassion is really, really important in documentary filmmaking. You cannot make a documentary film the kind of I make without being compassionate to your characters and to their stories. And I think compassion is really, really important for all of us, especially in this day and age.
No,
That
I
was also
appreciate that.
one of the things that really I think connected me to Gar Jameson, who invited me to Las Vegas, where I met you, and I met great people on my trip to Las Vegas.
And you came out because you produced a documentary and directed a documentary, the story of Wilfrid Israel. And that's what we want to talk about now. And how did you first become aware of Wilfrid Israel? And it's funny because, just a little preamble, every time I think I know everything about World War II and what led up to World War II, always there's a new book, a new documentary that brings out new materials. This one was a shocker. I was not aware at all of Wilfrid Israel. So why don't you share with us how you became aware of Wilfrid and what he did and the amazing story and the documentary itself?
So for you, it was a shock. So guess what it was for me? I grew up in a kibbutz, which is a small community. You know, used to be socialists back in the days. Crazy story itself. Probably some of you know what is a kibbutz. And I grew up in a kibbutz, and in the center of this kibbutz, there was this huge building that was called the Wilfrid's house. That was the name of the building. Now it was in the center of the kibbutz. You cannot miss it. And we knew that this house was built in the 40s, where all around were only tents, you know, back in the days. Um, And we knew that it was named after a man that was that his name was Wilfrid Israel. But on this big house, there was only one like plaque, or however you say it, you
Yeah,
know.
plaque. That's correct. Yes.
And it just said that Wilfrid Israel was a very wealthy man who donated his art collection to the kibbutz, and that he was a good friend of the founders. Now, I grew up in this kibbutz, so my grandparents built this house. They founded the kibbutz in 1936. They all the founders came from Germany. But my father was born there in 49. I was born there in 77, grew up there. My kids were playing there on the big grass lawn in front of Wilfrid's house. Nobody knew who was Wilfrid for 70 something years. Nobody talked about it. And then one day, a friend came to me and he said, listen, we must sit because I must tell you an amazing story. And he came to my office and we sat together and he gave me this book in English. And he said, why won't you read this book? This is a book that was written in the 1980s by an historian named Nomi Shepherd. The book's name is Wilfrid Israel, German Jewry's Secret Ambassador. And he gave me the book and he said, this is the biography of Wilfrid Israel. And I said, Wilfrid Israel from the Wilfrid's house? And he said, yes, you must read it. You're going to make a film about it. And I said, okay, this is 300 pages in English. It will take me a while. Why won't you summarize it for me? and then this friend of mine, Ophir, that's his name, he said, why won't you turn the book to the other side? Someone else will summarize it for you. And I turned the book to the cover, to the back cover. There were two paragraphs there. The top paragraph was by Martin Gilbert, one of the greatest historians of the 20th century, the biographer of Winston Churchill. And he wrote some amazing things about this character, Wilfrid Israel, and about the research that Nomi Shepherd was doing in order to write this book. But underneath that, there was another shorter paragraph which really attracted me, and that was one sentence. It said, never in my life have I come in contact with a being so noble, as strong, and as selfless as Wilfrid Israel, and underneath that, Albert Einstein. And then I was like, okay, if this is what Albert Einstein was writing about this man, even though it didn't make any sense to me, you know, if he was such an amazing character, and in this book, the whole story is in this book, he saved about 20,000 Jews. He was the man who started and was among he was the initiator and among the operators, or the most important operators of the Kindertransport operation. You know, he was there in Germany meeting the Quakers when they came to Germany just before the British Parliament approved the movement of 10,000 Jews, Jews without their parents, the Kindertransport. And he was the initiator of the thing. And how didn't we know in the kibbutz about this whole thing? You know, this doesn't make any sense. And how come nobody in Israel spoke about it? Because Wilfrid Israel didn't only know Albert Einstein. He was a good friend of Chaim Weizmann, who was the first president of Israel. He was a very good friend of Martin Buber. He was a very good friend of Moshe Sharet. He was a very good friend of Siegfried Lehmann and Max Warburg, really, really important people from that time. Writes to Wilfrid Israel in a big box in the kibbutz archive. I could find all these letters and I was amazed, like all these people. And nobody said a word about him. And that was the beginning of my journey with Wilfrid Israel. It took 6 years. By the way, I didn't produce it. It's important to say that the producers are Noam Shalev, Ophir Ber, and Ilan Ber.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for correcting that. What was the reason that nobody knew about him, given the fact that he had this impact and that he was obviously connected with a lot of important people as well, and he was wealthy in his own right? Why is it that this became an unknown story?
Well, you know, it's only my assumption in the end because I was not there. But from all the 6 years that I spent reading everything that was ever written about Wilfrid Israel, and from knowing a little bit about psychology and post-trauma, I think that there are two main reasons why the story of Wilfrid Israel was kept untold for so many years. The first reason is that in order to save Jews from Germany in the 1930s, you didn't fight with the Nazi administration with gun machines or with hand grenade. You know, you had to communicate with them, you had to bribe them, you had to speak with them, you had to, you know, you had to play the game with them, even though you hated them. But you had to speak with them, and you had to find the common interest.
Mhm.
And there was a common interest between the Zionist party or the Zionist organizations and the Nazi administration at the time, not because they liked each other, but because both of them wanted the Jews out of Germany.
Mhm.
And that I'm talking about the 30s, before the final solution. So this is what I call the small Holocaust, you know, the Holocaust of German Jewry. We have to remember that there were 530,000 Jews in Germany in 1933. 330,000 were able to leave, and 200,000 stayed there and died in the concentration camps
Mhm.
or from other reasons. And that is actually the second reason why the story of Wilfrid Israel was kept untold. Because the first reason is that he had to communicate with the Nazis. Whomever spoke with the Nazis was regarded as a betrayer in Israel. When it was founded, you either know or you can read more about the Kastner event in Israel in 1957, a Jew that was saving Jews, but doing that while communicating with the Nazi administration in Hungary, was killed in Tel Aviv. And I think that if I was a friend of Wilfrid Israel, I would want to keep his story quiet because he did communicate with the Nazi administration. He did bribe them as much as possible, not to save himself, but to save people that he didn't know from concentration camps in Germany, and to buy visas and to get certificates for people and all that. So he used money, and he used money, and the money was paid to the Nazis. That was the only way to save people back in the days. And that was something that was not appreciated in Israel for many, many, many years. The second reason is that when you save so many people, you also have to prioritize. You have to make really tough decisions. How many visas you give to whom, and in many cases, instead of whom, and with what money. And that was a really, really difficult thing. And we all know the stories of you know, and the people that actually stayed there in Germany were either the older people, the elders, or the people that had less money. And Wilfrid Israel is someone who was able to help so many people, could not help everyone. And Wilfrid Israel himself asked the people from the kibbutz not to tell his story. And during my research, I also find out that he could help some of the parents of the kibbutz founders, but not all of them. So imagine that, you know, your parents were saved by someone that also tried to help my parents, but he couldn't help my parents.
Right.
And we are neighbors. So I don't think that you would go around and say, "Oh, Wilfrid Israel was so great; he saved my parents," because he couldn't save the parents of your neighbor.
Right.
And this whole thing of the survivor's guilt, these people didn't speak in general, so they didn't speak about Wilfrid Israel as well. My grandfather never spoke about Germany until he was on his last days, you know. It was something, it was like a taboo. You don't speak about the past. So that's another reason. The fact that he was homosexual didn't help as well, um, to make him into a hero. And he was not the right hero for the Zionist. He was not the right hero for Israel that was just born. You know, Israel needed heroes with rifles and with something in their hand to work in the field,
Right.
not German businessmen um, that had to bribe the Nazis, that was homosexual, that never held a gun in his life, and was actually a pacifist and a Buddhist. Didn't really work for them.
Well, it's a great documentary for people to watch. Before I let you go, though, what was the reaction in the wider world to the documentary when it came out? And then what was the reaction to the people on the kibbutz when the documentary came out?
So we started at the kibbutz. The kibbutz was the lakmus, how do you say it, paper. You know, we tried it in the kibbutz, and that was really, really intense for me. Big cinema, and many people came, probably 500-600 people, and I could feel the electricity in the air. But in the end of this screening, some of the sons and daughters of the founders came to me and said, thank you very much. This documentary helped us understand our parents better and why they were so quiet and never talked about this period, and also why they were not that emotional and so closed because of this pain that they had. They had to leave their country, they had to leave their parents. Many of these parents never came to Israel because they perished in the Holocaust. So there was a lot of pain there, and they wanted to just shut it down and not let the next generation be involved in this pain, which is something that we all can understand, you know. So that was the kibbutz. In Israel and in the world, it was quite amazing. You know, I was privileged to screen this film in the United Nations main offices in Vienna, at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, Museum of Holocaust in Montreal. I think it was also in the Museum of Holocaust in Sydney, and many, many, many other countries around the world. And I think the most amazing thing that happened with this film, it's not only because of this film, but for many, many years, Yad Vashem, which is the Israeli organization for the memory of the Holocaust, had no recognition of Jews who saved Jews. So you could be a righteous among the nations only if you were a Christian or Muslim, but not a Jew. So there was no recognition for people like Wilfrid Israel. And this thing actually changed in the year 2020, where Yad Vashem made a whole year event. I don't know how to say it exactly in English, but the whole year was about Jews who saved Jews, and Wilfrid Israel was in the front. So to me, it also showed that amazing characters like Wilfrid Israel that really, and if you watch the film and if you read the book by Naomi Shepherd, which is so amazing, she made such an amazing research, and I could never make this documentary without her. It's a good place to say today. She's 90 years old today, and she's in London. She's an amazing human being, and I owe her so much. You will find out that Wilfrid Israel was really a person that we all should look up for, you know, as someone to admire, you know, someone inspiring, someone that was acting with so much courage in one of the most difficult times in history. And he was not a strong man. He was a man that suffered from sickness and different illnesses, and his mental condition was not always that great, but he was able to get this powers from somewhere and to stay there in Germany. Don't forget, he was British. he could leave Germany at any. He was half British, so because he was born in British, so he had a British passport. That was, by the way, one of the reasons why his store was not taken by the Nazi administration until 1939. He could still run the Israel big department store because he was British, so he could leave at any given time, and he decided to stay there, do all these efforts, save all these people, and even coming back there after he had left to England, and he came back 2 months before the war started to help with the last trains of the Kinder transport. And then he died together with Leslie Howard, by the way, from Gone with the Wind, on the same airplane. When he came back, after he after he saved 3,000 people from Portugal and Spain, giving them visas and organizing a big boat that left in the beginning in 1943. So I think in this day and age, a human being like that should be remembered and should be like a lighthouse for us.
Well, I think that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been award-winning documentary film producer and director Yo-natan Nir. His documentary, The Essential Link, The Story of Wilfrid Israel, is an amazing story of a wealthy Jewish businessman and owner of Berlin's largest department store in the 1930s, who was involved in the saving of tens of thousands of Jews. For more information about this documentary and everything about Yo-natan Nir, go to YonatanNir.com, and you can follow him on Vimeo, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And Yo-natan, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, and have a great day.
And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.